Hello again, Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club here, and we're going to start our series on attacking the king, and we're going to begin with what people call the back rank mate, or the corridor mate, or sometimes the edge of board mate. Let's get started. Here is the basic position for a back rank mate. This usually happens when the king is located on his back rank, and oftentimes he's secured behind his pawns from the castled position, and the rook has moved away or been traded off. And hopefully you can see the easy checkmate here. White simply moves his rook in and claims checkmate. Because the king can't go off the edge of the board, he's trapped in a corridor of pawns, and that's why it's called the corridor mate or edge of board mate, and he's also trapped on his back rank. So you can see that's why they have three different names. Let's make it a little more challenging. Now here we can see that black has a rook defending his back rank. Unfortunately, he only has one piece defending the key square, and white has two attackers. Hopefully you can quickly see what white's to do here. White sacrifices his queen, saying check. Once the rook captures, white captures, checkmate. Again, we have the same familiar position, trapped in the corridor of pawns against the edge of the board on his back rank. So now let's go ahead and move on to the next puzzle. And here we can see that black's king is helping defend the critical square. So now we have two defenders on this square and two attackers on that square. Well, white has a nice trick here. White can push the king away with a check, removing one of the defenders of the critical square. And by the way, as we're going through these pretty quickly, if at any time you want to pause the video and see if you can figure out the answers on your own, please do so. But here we have the queen simply attacks the king. She is protected by the rook, so he cannot capture her, and he has to move away. So once he moves away, he's no longer defending this critical square, and the rook is not enough, one defender against two attackers. So the queen moves in like the previous example, saying check, forcing the rook to take, and we have checkmate again. So moving into this position, what we can see is that once again we see the critical square. If white can get here, checkmating the king in the corridor on the edge of the board, then white's going to win. Unfortunately for white, black has two defenders on this square, and white only has two attackers on this square. But white has a trick up his sleeve. Pause the video and see if you can find it. And here's the answer. White can capture, sacrificing with a queen, sacrificing with a queen, removing one of those defenders, and now we have two attackers against one defender, and we have checkmate. What it was trying to show you before was, what if we simply move the rook into position? We can see that white's army is overwhelmed with too much defense, and it doesn't lead to a checkmate. It does lead to a queen versus a rook and three pawns, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which side you'd rather play in that situation. However, if white sacrifices his queen, removing a defender, then white's army can overwhelm the black king. Now, what if it looks a little different? Black doesn't have three pawns here anymore, but white has something that is referred to as a nail in his coffin, or the nail. The nail is often a pawn in the king's position, and you'll notice that he's covering the squares that black's pawns used to reside on. So we still have a corridor situation. Oftentimes players forget that these squares can be covered or threatened or attacked by another piece, and since there isn't an obvious three pawns here, they don't think that they have a back rank attack. But again, if the rook attacks, the king cannot escape because of the nail. And again, we have checkmate. So it's really important when you're marching your pawns or pawn storming the king to try and get a nail in the position to cover those squares so you can create a corridor mate. Okay, So let's look at more of a position you might see in a game where we have a threat that leads to either checkmate or winning extra material. A lot of times if you have a threat of checkmate, but the opposing side has a way out of it, oftentimes that threat of checkmate is so overwhelming that the only way they can escape is to give up material or sacrifice pieces. And then it's just a little bit longer until you win the game. So looking at this, what we want to notice is that white is attacking this critical square for checkmate. But black does have two defenders. Now we saw in a previous example that if white's queen were to move here and check the king, forcing him to move away, that then he wouldn't be defending this critical square, and white would have two attackers against black's only defender. Unfortunately for white, black has a defender of this weak square. Well, what can white do here? Well, white has an additional piece we haven't discussed. The bishop also attacking this weak square with the opportunity to attack the king. So here's the check. Now, the problem is if black captures this piece, well, now we have our two attackers attacking this critical square. Let's see what happens. King has to move. And now I hope you can see it. Checkmate. Let's go back to the beginning. What if black doesn't want to capture with his queen? What if instead the king simply moves? Well, take a moment and pause the video and ask yourself, what would you do in this situation? How would you maneuver? Remember, we do have a rook and a queen, both staring at this critical square. The bishop is in the way. It needs to move to get out of the way. Of course, if the bishop moves, black can simply bring another defender to one of these squares that would then give an opportunity to protect, and then it would be 2 against 2. So what should we do here? The answer is to block. Now, one technique that separates masters from amateurs is blocking. I've heard this in many training videos watching St. Louis Chess Club. If you haven't seen their channel, it's incredible to watch. They were talking about when the king wants to escape check. When the king wants to escape check, you have 3 options. You can simply move the king, which I call run away. You can capture the offending piece, or you can block the check. And a lot of times, amateurs don't think about blocking. If they can't capture, they simply run away. Well, blocking also works in situations like this. In other words, black has a rook that is defending this square. But if white could block the rook's access to that square, that would be a good thing. Therefore, what if the bishop blocks the rook? Now the bishop is no longer defending this square, and white has 2 attackers. So what's black to do? If black captures this bishop using his move to capture, well, now we're on a 1 versus 2 situation, and we have checkmate. Okay, let's back that up. What if black needs to take the time to give 2 defenders to the critical square, but unfortunately, white's bishop is blocking their access? Now it's just an easy checkmate. So hopefully that shows you the idea of blocking, that if the king were to run away, if the king were to run away, that white could block the access. All right, let's look at another idea. So here we're going to talk about a weak square. We can see the king is in his traditional castled position. And in this castled position, the weak square is the f7 square. It's important to recognize that it's weak. It might look like it's strong because the king is defending it and the rook is defending it. That's 2 defenders. But if you're counting and playing along at home, I hope you see that white has 3 attackers. And this is going to be really important because we're going to use this weak square to gain access to this attacking square. Let's see what that looks like. The queen comes in with check. She was the only piece that could deliver a check. If the rook was to move in, it would capture the pawn, but it wouldn't check the king. Checking is more forcing, and we want forcing moves. So the king has two options. I suppose the king could run away, but that just leads to an easy checkmate. Okay. So instead, black needs to capture this queen. Well, we used that weak square to gain access to this critical square. And I want you to notice the opportunities we have. Check, rook has to block, and now the only thing defending the rook is a king, but we have two rooks pointed at this square. Doesn't matter which one we capture with, it's now checkmate. We could have captured with the other rook, still checkmate. Okay, so now we've seen that in the castle position we have a weak square and we have a critical attacking square. And we use the weak square to gain access to the critical attacking square. Well, let's look at a different idea. Hopefully you know your tactics, and we're going to use a basic tactic here. It's called a pin. Right now, this pawn is pinned to the king and it cannot move. Okay. So again, the queen comes in, very forcing. Because if the king were to move away, this is a simple checkmate. It forces black to respond. So black has to respond by capturing with the rook. But notice the pin. The rook can no longer move because the bishop is pinning it to his king, and you cannot ever put your own king in check. Hopefully you can see the winning move here. The rook says checkmate. Why? Because this rook cannot move here to block because he's pinned. So now we've seen that the weak square can be taken advantage of with the concept of a pin. Okay, so let's look at a couple of game examples to see this happening in a game. Now, this first example was between Sir George Thomas and Frank Marshall in the early 20th century, the early 1900s. And we're not going to worry too much about the opening theory or what moves they're making or what mistakes they might be making on the way to the critical position. Let's just get there. A queen's pawn opening. We have an Indian defense. With e6, it looks maybe like a Nimzo Indian or possibly a Queen's Indian defense, depending on what white does here. Knight to c3 would be the Nimzo, but knight to f3 leads to the Queen's Indian defense because black fianchettos their queenside bishop. You can study these openings and learn the theory and what some of the attacking ideas are, what some of the critical squares are, but we're just going to make some moves here. Follow the game as it was played. Black attacks the center. White's getting ready to attack down the c-file as things open up. So we're opening things up. You can see how white's getting ready to attack down the c-file. Again, this queen move not only attacks the c-file supported by the rook, but also supports the bishop down the long diagonal. Again, more moves are made. The bishop captures instead of the pawn because we want to keep that c-file open. And now look at this. The bishop is attacking. Bishop is attacking, the queen is attacking. We've got some great attacking prospects here with white's position. Black tries to close it up. Again, moving these pawns to attack down the c-file, preserving our bishop. Black makes an interesting rook lift here, probably getting ready to move it over and attack a weak square in white's position for counterplay. So white attacks the center with his knight. Look at this, attacking some great squares in the position. Central knights are very powerful. You can see he makes his rook move, preparing queen to h4, attacking the weak h2 square. So we need to eject this knight. He gets rid of our well-placed knight. And here comes the attack. So the best thing that white can do here, you can pause and look for what you might do. It's not about attacking the queen. It's about revealing the defense. 2 versus 2. And the queen is in danger and the knight is in danger. So a lot is going on here. Saves his queen. When we take this knight, unfortunately, it reveals a weak pawn. And we're in trouble here. But if you've been paying attention to all the previous examples, you'll notice the king's castled position. And you'll remember that this is a weak square. And we like to use the weak square to gain access to the critical square. So what does white do here? Defends his king while attacking that weak square. Black probably would have been well advised to go ahead and trade queens here to reduce the attack, but he didn't see it coming. So he took the free bishop. The problem with the hanging bishop is this move. Early on, I told you that white was trying to attack on the c-file. And take a look what's going on here. The white rook is now threatening to take this undefended bishop. Simultaneously, we've now got 3 attackers on this weak square. This weak square that black only has 2 defenders, but white has 3 attackers. If you've been watching the previous examples, we know what's about to happen. Unfortunately, black did not know this technique. Saves the bishop, and can you imagine what happens here? All together now. Queen captures f7 check. This game is about to end. He takes, and I hope you can see the critical square and what our rooks need to be doing. Check. Tries to block. Doesn't work. Tries to block. Checkmate. Black lost because he didn't realize that this technique is how we break into the castled position. Let's take a look at another game real quick against Loye and Beamish, 1913. Again, we'll cruise through the moves as quickly as we can. Doing an Italian game here. Both sides are attacking the weakest square in the opening position. Getting ready to launch an attack in the center. Beautiful central control by white. Blocks the check maneuver. This is pretty typical in an Italian game. We let that kind of hang out for a moment because look at how open that line is. So we're now attacking here. We're attacking here. We're threatening to pin and attack here. White has a good solid attack coming, and it's all because black's king is stuck in the center. If you're a beginning player, castling early is a good idea. Saves his bishop, but now we pin the knight. 2 knights are under attack. Excuse me. Saves his knight. 1 knight falls. Castles, finally. So we attack the knight. This trade allows us to get the queen into the position. And now look at this. We're attacking the weak square and the undefended knight. This is a beautiful fork. So what's black to do here? He defends his knight, but does not yet satisfy the weak square. So we bring in another piece. Here comes the knight on the weak square. Black captures it. And this beautiful move here, we're threatening the queen, and we're threatening the weak square. Now, if it were me or you, recognizing that this is the weak square, ideally the queen might want to move to one of these squares, providing support to the weak square. But black took the bait, capturing the bishop. And what move would you make here? Let's take a look. We have 2 pieces coming down the weak square. We've got a rook wanting to come down and reposition here. Queen to f7, sacrificing that queen. Notice the pin. That rook cannot move. If you remember the pin from the earlier example, you know that this is checkmate because of this pin. All right, one last game if you're interested. If you're checking out now, that's okay. Please like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, visit us on Facebook at Hood County Chess Club and press the like button. But here's one more great example for those sticking around. This one was Keres and Alekhine, or Alekhine, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And king's pawn opening, going for the Ruy Lopez. Attacking and creating a great outpost. Wanting to get that c3 knight into the outpost. Fianchettoing his bishop, attacking the center, developing pieces, opening up the center, and now we're preventing black from castling. Keeping the king in the center is very powerful. This knight is making a maneuver. As you can see, there is a great outpost for a knight. This knight would love to just jump into it, but then we could recapture. So we need a second knight where after the capture, the knight would remain. So he makes his first move in the knight maneuver to get there. We claim our outpost and trying to prevent that maneuver. So capturing. And now we still have the king stuck in the center. Opening up the center to attack. Here comes our queen in the center. So black realizes that he's not going to be able to castle. So he trades off that annoying bishop. And look at this. White castles queenside, lining up his queen and his rook down here, trying again to keep the king in the center, preventing him from castling queenside. Let's see how it works out. Black's moving his piece out of the way to try and castle. So we take a piece. Black has got to respond. We've got a lot of pressure on this square. We've got our bishop, our queen, and our rook, and all black has is these two pieces, so this bishop is in danger. So when you've got a weak piece, trade it off. But notice now that we've got a lot of control on that square, and black's not going to be able to castle. So we're trapping him in the center of the board. Again, blocking to try and castle. And here comes this knight maneuver. Now, he took the free pawn, hoping to draw the queen away. If the queen goes away, well, then our queen is going to come in and say checkmate. So black's queen cannot take our knight because checkmate is the threat. So finally, he gets castled and he's excited. But again, we recognize weak squares and target squares. So we bring our knight back to save it, opening the position, and now we're attacking the queen. The purpose of this is that this queen is helping defend this weak square. If we can get the queen to move, then black will be down to only the two defenders. At which point, we're in a really great position to do the sacrifice with the check with the two rooks. Black didn't see it coming. Moves his queen out of the way, and hopefully you know by now what's coming. Queen sacrifice. Rook captures. Rook checks. It's now 2 against 1 on the weakened square. Checkmate. But what if we go back here? And in this position, what if the king just ran away? Well, this is just as deadly. We're going to take the free rook, forking the king and the other undefended rook. And then we're going to get that rook too. And now there's so much material here, black should just resign. So that's a good example of how the threat of checkmate can often lead to a great material win, which just means you'll win several moves later. Well, thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, this is Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club.